The truth always prevails at last, a popular saying in my hometown that reveals a lot about time. The truth always comes out last and is well believed at last. How does this relate, you may ask? Well, today, we will be discussing a very interesting topic, one which most people don't even know existed. And as Christians, this topic will add more strength to your belief in God and our Lord Jesus. Today, we will be revealing a lost script titled, The Letter of Pilate. Yes, Pilate was the governor of Galilee at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. This letter has a lot of conjoined scripts with it. It's not a part of the canonized books of the Bible. It is rather described as an apocryphal book or the Piloty Cycle, confirming the real truth of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. There are several letters to be considered in this Piloty Cycle. Some of them are Anaphora Pilati, the letter of Herod to Pilate, the letter of Pilate to Claudius, and the letter of Pilate to Herod, letter of Pilate to Tiberius, letter of Tiberius to Pilate, Mors Pilati, and so on. In most of these letters, Pilate revealed the truth about the crucifixion and the resurrection. Does this letter contain information that is contrary to the gospel we know or in support? Stay tuned to find out, and please, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. Let's go into full details. The first letter we will be considering is the Anaphora Pilati, or report of Pontius Pilate. This is a report written by Pilate to Emperor Tiberius describing Jesus' execution and its aftermath. The text is estimated to more likely originate from the late 4th century or the 5th century. The Anaphora Pilati contains the written witness of Pilate regarding the miracles of Jesus. The miracles of Jesus are plain and obvious to Pilate as more powerful than any of the Roman gods provide, yet the Jews blindly reject Jesus and demand his punishment, despite being unable to convict him of a single crime. Pilate only allows the execution to proceed to prevent a rebellion. After Jesus' death, a supernatural light comes down on Jerusalem in the 3rd hour of the night. An earthquake opens the mountains, and the dead pour out from Hades. The next letter on the list is a letter from Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee, to Pilate. A Syriac document from the 5th or 6th century is the oldest version available today, although it likely originates from the late 4th century. This is another letter involving Pilate and confirming both the gospel of Jesus and Pilate's letters. In the letter of Herod to Pilate, Herod belatedly realizes his evil deeds, such as cutting off John the Baptist's head, and writes to Pilate about the just punishment coming to him and the Jews. Herod's daughter, Herodia, is bizarrely decapitated after her mother grabs her head trying to save her from a sudden flood of the river. His son Lesbinox is dying of a wasting disease. His wife is going blind, and he is being afflicted by worms. Herod affirms that God has handed over the kingdom to Gentiles like Pilate, that death was coming to the priests of Judaism, and that Jews like him had failed to abide by God's law. He requests that Pilate bury him and his family after their deaths, rather than the already damned Jewish priests. Herod adds that Longinus, who stabbed Jesus with his spear, had also suffered lopsided punishment. He was being eternally devoured by a lion. His body is restored every dawn, and the lion shreds his body each night until the second coming of Christ, somewhat similar to the punishment of Prometheus. The letter of Pilate to Claudius is a document written by Pilate to Emperor Claudius and written in Greek. It is potentially one of the oldest pieces of Pilate literature, dating from some point between the end of the 2nd century AD and the 5th century. The letter was later incorporated into the Acts of Peter and Paul, a 5th century work. It evinces a positive attitude toward Pilate. The account is largely a contradiction of the stolen body hypothesis that suggests Jesus' body was stolen, rather than resurrected. Pilate first affirms that Jesus performed amazing miracles during his term as governor. Pilate was convinced to hand him over to the Jews because the chief priests said he was a sorcerer who has violating Jewish law. The author then shows familiarity with the Gospel of Matthew and repeats the story from there that Pilate had sent soldiers to watch the tomb. Jesus had risen from the dead in the presence of the soldiers, and the chief priests of the Jews had paid off the soldiers in an attempt to spread lies that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body instead. In the letter of Pilate to Claudius, Pilate testifies that the soldiers instead informed him of the bribe and the truth of the matter, that the resurrection was real. He then decided to write up this report so that Claudius would not believe the lies of the Jews. Another is that the letter was original to Tiberius, but when it was incorporated into the Acts of Peter and Paul, its recipient was updated to fit better into that story. In the Acts, the apostle Simon Peter and the deceiver Simon Magus appear before Emperor Nero. When Nero hears about Christ, he asks how he can learn more about him. Peter suggests retrieving Pilate's letter to the previous emperor Claudius, and it is read aloud. Another letter included in the Piloty Cycle is the Letter of Pilate to Herod, documented by Pontius Pilate to Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee. A Syriac document from the 5th or 6th century is the oldest version available to us today. The work is hypothesized to have originally been written in the 3rd or 4th century. It bears several similarities to the Paradosis Pilati, notably in its respect to Pilate and his wife's conversion. Unlike the Paradosis Pilati, in the Letter of Pilate to Herod, Pilate expresses remorse over executing Jesus. His messengers were sent to Galilee to find the resurrected Jesus and confirm his divine power. He, his wife Procla, and the centurion Longinus all convert to Christianity and affirm Christian teachings. Pilate describes being personally blessed by a vision of the Lord. The Letter of Pilate to Tiberius is a short letter that Pilate purportedly wrote to Emperor Tiberius. It is a comparatively late text, perhaps as late as the Renaissance. It was originally written in Latin. The depiction of Pilate is quite positive. Pilate describes Jesus as the most pious person who ever existed and explains himself as having to execute him only because he feared an uprising of the Jews against Rome had he declined. This led to the response from Tiberius. The Letter of Tiberius to Pilate is a Greek text from Emperor Tiberius to Pilate. It is hypothesized to be from comparatively late during medieval Christianity, around the 11th century at the earliest. Despite being written in Greek, it evinces later Western attitudes toward Pilate, considering him a criminal. The writer may have been familiar with the acts of Pilate. While the letter alludes to an earlier letter from Pilate to Tiberius, this earlier letter does not appear to be the Anaphora Pilati, the Renaissance letter of Pilate to Tiberius above, or any other extant similar work. It is unknown if this other letter was a mere rhetorical flourish or a lost work. According to the work, the letter was sent by Tiberius' 2,000 Roman soldiers and a courier named Rahab. Tiberius is enraged at Pilate's unjust sentence to Jesus, of whom Tiberius has received reports of his amazing deeds of healing. Pilate, Herod Archelaus, Philip, Annas, Caiaphas, and the Jewish leaders are to be arrested and brought to Rome. The soldiers are also to slay all Jewish males for the crime of the execution of Jesus and defile the Jewish women. The letter continues to describe their later fates. The Jewish leaders suffer horrific deaths, being beheaded, impaled, crucified, and squeezed to death. The Mors Pilati, or the death of Pilate who condemned Jesus, is a letter of Tiberius to Pilate. It has a hostile attitude toward Pilate. While the modern form is from the 14th century, a version appears in the Golden Legend of the 1250s. This work may have been inspired by an excerpt from a work called the Historia Apocrypha from the 11th and 12th centuries, which itself might have been inspired by the Vindicta Salvatoris of the 8th and 9th centuries. In the death of Pilate, Emperor Tiberius is ill. He sends his emissary Volusian to seek out the famous healer Jesus of Nazareth, but Volusian is too late. Pilate has already executed him. Volusian instead finds Saint Veronica and takes both Veronica and Pilate back to Rome. Veronica uses a handkerchief with Jesus' image imprinted on it to heal Tiberius instead. Tiberius brings Pilate before him for judgment, but is stalled because Pilate is wearing part of Jesus' tunic that had been divided the day of his execution, and the emperor finds himself unable to act hostilely against someone wearing it. After a Christian strips Pilate of his scrounged holy tunic, Tiberius orders Pilate's execution. Pilate stabs himself with a dagger upon hearing the news. His dead body is then moved several times, as malignant spirits rejoice and stir up trouble around wherever his body lies, and the terrified locals move the body to stop the thunder, hail, windstorms, and so on. His body finally rests in a lake near Lausanne, in the mountains of the Alps, which is isolated enough to trouble fewer people. Lastly, we will be evaluating the Paradosis Pilati. The Paradosis Pilati, or the handing over of Pilate, is an account of Pilate being brought to Rome for judgment before Emperor Tiberius for his execution of Jesus. The account may have been one of the earliest to name Pontius Pilate's wife as Procla. It also describes Procla as being an earlier convert to Christianity than Pilate himself. In the handing over of Pilate, Tiberius orders Pilate brought to him as a prisoner, somehow intuiting that the darkness that covered the world at Jesus' execution was his fault. At trial, Pilate deflects and says that the Jewish leaders, as well as the entire multitude of the Jews, were the ones truly at fault. Tiberius suggests that Pilate should have sent Jesus to Rome for his safety. At the speaking of Jesus' name, all the emblems and statues of the Roman gods turn to dust. After he is pressed again, Pilate again blames the Jews for his act. Tiberius authorizes a decree to the Roman governor to enslave and disperse the inhabitants of Judea and lay the nation waste. Pilate prays, and again blames the Jews. A voice from heaven responds and says that all the races and families of the Gentiles will bless Pilate, because the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies of Jesus happened under him. Pilate will personally appear as a witness at the second coming and of the judging of unbelievers. All these letters conclude that the letter confirms the life, crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Pilate later became a Christian, which is a win to Christianity. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel if you found it valuable. Thanks for watching and God bless.